How about that? Welcome, everybody. If you can hear the sound of my voice, maybe you could just raise your hand in the GoToWebinar. I know how to raise my hand control panel. We'll see if anyone can figure that out. Oh, good. If you have questions, you can chat them while we're talking. I may not get to them to the end, unless it looks like I know a really great question. But why don't we go ahead and get started? I'm expecting a lot more people, but you know how it is. Not everybody's on time. You know? So my name is Michael Devlin. I'm a real estate broker. I'm affiliated with eXp Realty and also with an independent. My background is I've spent 7 years at Keller Williams. I was a commercial mentor for one of the Keller Williams market centers, which is what they call offices. I spent a ridiculously long time at Century 21, where I was the vice president of the largest Century 21 group in Northern California. We did residential real estate, we did loans, we did business opportunities, we did commercial real estate. You know, anything that you could do in real estate to make money, you know, we pretty much did. So most of the people that are registered for this session are licensed agents. If you're not, at the end, I'll show you how to find out about getting licensed. But essentially, the purpose of this is to discuss how to add commercial real estate to your portfolio, or how to just become a commercial real estate agent, right? All of that. All right, so to start with, I oftentimes get the question from agents and from people thinking about getting into the business, and they'll say, well, tell me about the commercial real estate business. You know, explain it to me. Well, that's a difficult thing to explain because there are quite a few different aspects to the commercial real estate business, and they all operate very differently. And they're not all working in unison. In other words, when land is doing very well, that doesn't mean that others are doing very well. So sometimes one of them is booming, one is not. The laws, the forms, how you get paid, how long it takes to get paid, all of that kind of stuff is different. Multifamily, if it's a 1 to 4 units residential property, that's pretty much considered residential. You're a normal residential real estate agent. Once you get to 5 or more, things change. And at 5 or more units, it becomes commercial real estate, even though, you know, it is residential property. And then it goes up to apartment buildings and things like that. There's office and industrial, which are their own little niches. Retail, now I get asked this a lot, what do I mean by retail? Well, for example, right now, I'm in contract with a property that used to be a drive-through burger place, right? I sold recently a property that was a automobile supply store and a taqueria. Those are retail spaces, shopping centers, little shopping centers, where people would come in and buy stuff. Land is a completely different animal, right? The financing is different. What you need to know to be successful is different. Hospitality, of course, is referring to things like hotels. Specialty properties would include things like data centers and storage sheds and that sort of thing. And then landlord services encompasses the general, you know, category of property management, the leasing, the managing of the property, all of that sort of stuff. What are we expecting the commercial market to be like in 2021? And the short answer is it depends, right? It depends upon how well the vaccine rolls out, how soon the vaccine rolls out. It depends on shelter-in-place rules being relaxed. It depends on stimulus checks. It depends on a lot of things. So there have been a lot of commercial properties that have gone belly up, and more are expected before the commercial market stabilizes, right? Primarily, we're talking about hospitality and retail and office space. Warehouses and distribution centers, for example, are doing very, very well. It's very difficult to find warehouses for sale because there's a lot of demand for them, and less so for, let's say, office space. There's a lot of dark stores, as you might know. More retailers went bankrupt in 2020 than during the Great Recession. Brick and mortar retailers are having trouble because they're burning through their cash reserves and consumers are moving to online shopping. The experts predict that there's going to be 20% less retail real estate by 2025. And that's according to CBRE, which is a large Los Angeles-based commercial real estate group. But then once the coronavirus vaccine is distributed and US shoppers are expected to return, leave their couches and return to experience the brick and mortar stores, however, maybe not entirely at the same level they were before. And by the way, as an example, for in a sense, some of this going on right now, particularly in the retail market, has actually made it easier for buyers and sellers of retail space, easier for real estate agents too. And the reason is that up until COVID-19, it was very difficult to sell commercial retail space, not because there weren't buyers. There were lots of buyers. It was because most of the people in commercial real estate that are selling those spaces wanted to do a 1031 exchange, a tax-deferred exchange. And as you may know, in order to do that, you're going to have to identify a replacement property in 45 days and close in 180 days. Well, the problem was there wasn't anything for them to buy, right? There wasn't enough on the market. And so people realized, yeah, if I put my retail spot on the market, it's going to sell right away. That's not the problem. But what am I going to do with the money? I would like to invest in something else, and that's very competitive, very competitive. So office spaces are facing hurdles. In fact, this is even affecting real estate office spaces because there has been a work from home trend. Some companies have adjusted to that. The office demand, according to CBRE, could be permanently cut by 15% once the genie, is out of the bottle and companies realize that, hey, people can work from home, we're able to make this work. There's less demand for the traditional office space, particularly crammed in workstations, that sort of thing. I'm not sure when that's going to actually come back. The office market should reach bottom and then start stabilizing according in 2021. Halfway through next year, 2022, 85.7% of companies plan to return to the office, assuming everything goes well with vaccines and that sort of stuff. Cushman & Wakefield, which is a large commercial company, predicts that the expansion of the economy and population would create full recovery by 2025. Again, that doesn't necessarily mean that there isn't business for real estate agents, because that's also been a relatively tight market, not as much now as it used to be. It's much easier to find office space. Hotels are in trouble, as you might guess. They've had a tough year. They're expected to recover 50% of the revenue in 2021, but they're not going to recover really until 2023. And some of the upscale hotels are having, even more difficulty, and that may take even longer. Some of the hoteliers are not able to pay their mortgage. There's outstanding $30 billion in outstanding hospitality loans would come due in 2021, could cause a lot of them to go under. By the way, up until COVID-19 hit, I had a variety of customers that were looking to buy a hotel, motel, anywhere between $5 and $10 million. They had cash, they were eager, they were lined up. We couldn't find anything for them to buy. Now, if you'd like to buy a hotel, not that expensive. Warehouses are a champion, as I mentioned earlier. There's demand for them because we're doing more online shopping, e-commerce, that sort of thing. People are needing warehouses, and that market is actually booming. If you have warehouse space, I've got people looking for 8,000 or so of warehouse space in Silicon Valley. Very difficult to find right now, very difficult to find. And they expect 250 million square feet of additional demand for warehouse space in 2021. Which is a lot more than what we've had in the last 5 years. Apartment buildings. So yes, I know rent is down in San Francisco and it's even down in San Jose. However, rents are generally very high to start with, and its prices of homes are very expensive. The affordability index isn't very high, so there's demand, right, for that. There was a time when I had clients that were willing to buy anything that was multifamily up to 20 units in the Santa Clara County. Price really wasn't much of an issue as long as it had a certain return, and we were having difficulty for them to find it. Now, there's more multifamily units and apartment buildings that are available. There's probably, it's a fundamental need, as I say here, so there's always demand, especially at the right price points. Even though rents have been dropping in San Francisco and San Jose, the prices are stabilizing right now with rent. There's expected to be a rebound in 2021. Of course, that's based upon the eviction moratoriums and whether or not there's mortgage forbearance for landlords and how well the vaccine rolls out, and is there going to be stimulus packages that help in those sectors. What's the difference between residential and commercial from the point of view of a real estate agent? Well, one of the, when I also teach people how to get a real estate license, and also classes for people that are in the business, both new and used real estate agents. And if you're completely uninterested in arithmetic, don't like math, don't like calculating things, it may be more of a challenge to be in commercial real estate because it's all about the rate of return. And so you're going to need to know, what is a cap rate? How is it calculated? What is the monthly return on investment? What would be the payoff schedule? We have software that does this. It's not that difficult to learn, but you're going to have to learn how to use those. You have to learn what those things are and how to calculate them. Commercial real estate agent, there's a big upside to investing as a buyer in commercial real estate, and there can also be a big downside if you get the wrong property at the wrong time, where the market isn't actually getting better. And so you need to have something that is going to have a good return. In residential, a lot of times the transaction is done based upon emotion. People buy the house because they like it, they like the neighborhood, but not as much as in commercial real estate, right? Because a lot of that has to do not with the way the property works, but who's the tenant. And for example, if I told you that let's say you're a commercial real estate investor and there are 2 commercial buildings that you could buy. One of them is a kind of a rundown old building, right? It's not in a great neighborhood. It's near the airport, but Amazon has just signed a 10-year lease on the building. The other building is in a great location. It looks really nice. It's modern, it's fancy, but it's been vacant for the last 3 years. Now, if you're an investor, which building are you going to buy? Obviously, the one that Amazon has signed a 10-year lease. One of the things about commercial is a lot of the value is determined not as much as market data like past sales of similar properties, but the lease determines the value of the property. For example, when we talk about capitalization of net income, which is the rate of return that an investor is getting on their business, what is it that we're actually capitalizing? And the answer is the lease, right? And so the quantity of the rent, the quality of the tenant, and also the length of time that the lease exists for, those are the factors that oftentimes determine the value of the property in the view of an investor. Investors will buy buildings without really looking at them based upon the numbers and the rate of return, very different, obviously, from residential. How do you find clients, you ask? Well, I'm going to talk about the different levels of commercial real estate, and some of you may be here because occasionally you have clients that are buying and selling residential properties that also have a business. might want to buy a business, might want to invest in a business, that sort of thing. That's your sphere of influence and your client base. Outside of that, how do you find clients? And one of the answers is you call them on the phone. And we'll talk about some of the technology we have to identify those calls. And by the way, it's not the same calling business people as it is calling homeowners, right? If you call homeowners up and say, hi, my name's Mike, I'm a real estate agent, when do you plan on selling your home? They might be, well, annoyed that you're doing that. If I call a business owner up and I say, hi, my name is Mike Devlin, I'm a commercial real estate agent. I've been working with several clients in your neighborhood, and I thought I would give you a call to see if you had any needs, if you were interested in selling or buying another property or renegotiating your leases, any of that kind of stuff. I'm much more likely to get a positive response, because a lot of times the owner of commercial properties, that's what they do, is they buy and sell commercial properties. And it's not considered as much to be an imposition that I'm calling them or talking to them. Of course, you're going to have to know cap rates and what gross rent multipliers are and what internal rate of return is and what's a levered analysis versus an unlevered analysis and what is a rent roll and a bunch of other things like that so that you can talk to them. You also can do the social media, and by that I mean be an influencer, make videos, do things that people that own commercial real estate might be interested in. How much do you make? Well, you know, it's not uncommon. Most of the commercial transactions we do is 6% commission. And by the way, I'm going to talk more about this. It is far more common in the commercial world to double in the transaction, right? Far more common. In fact, that's sort of our goal. And because of the price points, we just listed a portfolio group of properties for about $6 million, 6% commission. You can do the math. So a lot of times, given the price point and depending upon what kind of commercial you're doing, the commission check could be 10 times higher than what you're used to getting in residential. Of course, there are residential properties that are very expensive too. The thing also, though, is that it may take longer, right? From the time of contact and yeah, I'm interested in selling my shopping center until you've actually listed the shopping center and sold the shopping center and gotten your commission check, that could be a lot longer than what it would take in a normal residential transaction. They happen to be much, much quicker. If you don't like working evenings and weekends, right? I don't know if any of you feel that way. You don't want to go to people's homes, right? You don't want to be sitting at the kitchen table. You don't want to do this on weekends and evenings and showing homes with the families with their children running around. You don't want to do that. You like to work pretty much a 9-to-5 job, 40 hours a week normal. That's much more possible in commercial, because again, you're doing business to business kind of transactions and the people you're talking to are generally working normal business hours. But it takes longer, right, in order to do something. There's also a lot more training that's going to be involved, mentorship and that sort of stuff, which I'll talk about in a little bit. Other differences. First of all, disclosures. Most of the if you're a residential agent, most of the disclosure rules that you have learned do not apply. So for example, let's say I'm selling a commercial property and I find a buyer and the buyer wants a loan, right? And I'm a broker, but the buyer wants a loan. And so I refer the buyer to a commercial lender, and the commercial lender says to me, hey, why don't we work together? I'll pay you a referral fee. Can a real estate agent receive a referral fee from a lender? Now, many of you may be saying, no, you're going to go to jail. They're going to take away your license. RESPA, which is the law that limits the payment of referral fees, only applies to residential properties 1 to 4 units. It does not apply to commercial properties. Truth in lending, you know, the 3 days that you have to wait from when the loan docs are sent out and they get the CD and they sign all the documents. Truth in lending does not apply to properties that are not 1 to 4 units of residential property. The transfer disclosure statement does not apply except to properties of 1 to 4 units that are residential. The seller property questionnaire does not apply. So most of the disclosure requirements that you're familiar with don't apply. Now, what does apply is you need to do a natural hazard disclosure. You have to tell people about plumbing fixtures, the water conserving plumbing fixtures, you just have to tell them. And if somebody has died in the property within the last 3 years, which is not as likely in commercial, but possible, you have to disclose that, but you don't have to use any particular form. So I'm going to be talking about forms, but one of the transactions we're in right now, the buyer's agent who says that he knows commercial and understands commercial, used the California Association of Realtors commercial property purchase agreement, which, by the way, is not the form commercial agents typically use. And turns it over to the transaction coordinator. The company is a residential company, right? I shouldn't say the name, it's Compass, but this would be true, by the way, for most of the residential companies. Turns it over to a transaction coordinator. Transaction coordinator sends us this boilerplate. Where's the TDS? Where's the seller property questionnaire? Where? You're not going to get that. Well, what about, and then finally went and talked to somebody, and they saw in the California Association of Realtors disclosure chart that if somebody's died in 3 years, you have to disclose that. So then they send us the exempt seller disclosure, which is another California Association of Realtors form, which we refuse to fill out, not required, right? If you read the California Association of Realtors purchase contract for commercial, it's not on the list. We use something else called AIR forms, which are commercial real estate forms. And under mandatory disclosures, the only thing really is listed is the natural hazard disclosure. There's a questionnaire for the seller to fill out asking, is there any pending litigation or anything that was done without permits or that sort of thing. And if somebody died on the property in the last 3 years, you're supposed to say it, right? But you don't have to fill out the exempt seller disclosure. You don't have to fill out a TDS. You don't have to do any of that, but it's considered to be a material fact. You still have to disclose material facts. Agency disclosure is required. The natural hazard disclosure is required, and the disclosure of material facts is required, but that's about it. So we normally do not use the forms from the California Association of Realtors, right? We don't use those in commercial. And one way we know whether or not we're dealing with somebody who knows what they're doing is when they send us an offer on the California Association of Realtors form. Now, I know some of you may be thinking, I've sold commercial property and I used the form and nobody complained. And I was at a webinar that the CAR Legal did, and they said their form is a really good form, and why not use that, right? I understand it's done, but that's only at a lower level of commercial. We use a form from a company called AIR. Right now, bigger commercial companies have their own forms. Now, one of the things about the form that I also would point out is, let's say you have a client who wants to buy a house in Texas, right? They want to buy a house in Texas. Can you represent them on the purchase of a house in Texas? Now, from the California Department of Real Estate point of view, the answer is sure, as long as you don't go to Texas. Right? Because if you go to Texas to show them the homes or do stuff like that, Texas thinks you need a real estate license in Texas. But the other problem with you, even if you didn't go there, is you don't have access to the Texas residential purchase agreements and all of that sort of stuff unless you join the Texas Association of Realtors and got access to all that. The forms we use in commercial, because commercial transactions are governed by the Uniform Commercial Code, don't change between California and Texas. We write offers on properties in other states using the same forms that we would use to write an offer on a property in California, because there isn't a lot of state-specific commercial rules, right? Not a lot of it. Lead generation, I talked a little bit about, and you can work your sphere of influence in your past customers and clients, but if you're serious about selling commercial real estate, you need to get into talking to people that own commercial properties, right? The training is very different. I think I've shared with you a copy of EXP. Right now, we're doing a 5-day long intensive certification program for commercial agents. I'm, by the way, approved by the California broker for EXP to help agents in both residential and commercial. But you need to go through this. If you want to do commercial real estate, you need to go through this training program. You need to be certified, which means you have to pass a test. And even then, you're going to need a mentor for your first 3 transactions because we don't want to be sued. Right? Specialization. I hired an agent a while ago from Marcus and Millichap, a commercial agent, not a member of the Board of Realtors, not a member of the Multiple Listing Service. She was on the retail desk at Marcus and Millichap, still is doing retail. Doesn't really know that much about business opportunities or land or leasing or the other things because they specialize. And most of the big and most successful commercial real estate agents specialize into a particular niche because everything is pretty much different within that niche. No MLS or Association of Realtors. Many of the big commercial companies, like for example, EXP has a commercial division. It's not a member of any Association of Realtors. It's not a member of the Multiple Listing Service. Now, that doesn't mean, and by the way, it makes it, you could join some of those yourself, but in big commercial companies, they're not members. No Multiple Listing Service. Now, I do understand some of you may be thinking, well, I've sold a commercial property and I found it on our MLS. And occasionally I also put commercial properties on the MLS if it's a lower level commercial property, something, you know, 800,000, 1.5 up to 2 million, something that a residential real estate agent might actually have a client for, but normally we don't put it in the Multiple Listing Service. What's important about that? If I ask you, as a member of the Multiple Listing Service, what is the most important part about being a member of the Multiple Listing Service? Now, you might say, well, I can search for properties. Yeah, you could use Redfin and Zillow. All right, well, what else is there? The forms, right? They have forms. Okay, all right. What about the MLS? What else do you get? Well, I can do a CMA, which Country Music Awards, or comparative market analysis. Okay, yeah, but is that really the most important part about being a member of the MLS? And the answer, in my view, is no. The most important part for you as an agent, particularly one representing a buyer, for being a member of the Multiple Listing Service is because that's where it says that if your buyer buys this property, you're going to get paid a commission. That's where it says it. Now, if the property is not in the Multiple Listing Service, where does it say that you're going to get a commission? It doesn't say. Right now, there are some brokers, like let's say if I had a warehouse, right, which right now is a really hot market. If I had a warehouse for sale and you called me up, right, because it's not in the MLS, but you might find it on other places, right? You called me up and you said, hi, my name is, I'm a real estate agent and I have a buyer interested in your warehouse. How much commission am I going to get if my buyer buys your warehouse? I would say, you're not getting a commission. You know, I've got the warehouse, right? There aren't very many of them for sale. Your buyer will find me eventually. And if your buyer doesn't, somebody else is going to find me. I don't need you to sell the warehouse. You understand? There is no beginning agreement to pay an agent, another agent, a commission, not necessarily if it's in commercial. So the process is a little bit different. Does that mean you're not going to get a commission? No, but you understand there's no upfront guarantee as to what that commission is going to be. So the process, and there are many different levels of commercial, but I'm talking about real commercial transactions. The process generally begins with an LOI, which stands for letter of intent. Sometimes you'll see it referred to as an MOU, which is a memorandum of understanding. And this is like, I don't know, foreplay, right? So this is a, hey, I got a client and interested. This is sort of the price. What do you think? And then they come back and say, no, that's not going to work. And you go back and forth writing up a letter of understanding until finally you've hashed out the details. And by the way, that's the point where you would be discussing what your commission is, right? That would be the point where you would say, I would like to get a 3% commission, right? At which point they might say, well, you're not going to get it. The seller's only going to pay 2. What that means is that you're having a buyer representation agreement. And just one thing about forms, in the commercial world, we don't talk, there's no RPA, residential purchase agreement. We refer to it as a PSA, which is a purchase and sale agreement, right? We don't use buyer broker agreements. We have buyer representation agreements, which are a little bit different. But that becomes more important in commercial because if it's not in the MLS and there's no obligation to pay a commission, you finding a warehouse for your client, you may not get anything unless you have an agreement with that client that you're going to get a certain amount of money. If in fact you close the transaction, you're going to have to sell your buyer that you deserve 3%, right? You're going to have to sell your buyer, right? And then we'll see how much the seller is going to pay, and we do that through the letter of intent. We don't have listing presentations, right? Those aren't the terms we use. We have proposals, and the proposals are like a listing presentation on steroids. One of the things that most big companies do, we do, is the layout, just the physical layout of the presentation is horizontal, landscape, not portrait, not vertical. Why? Because residential agents, generally their presentation is a portrait or vertical presentation, and we don't want to look like we're residential agents. It's far more involved. It's got far more information in it. I mean, we're talking maybe 40 pages. It's far more involved, let's just say. And sometimes these proposals, the person who's thinking of selling their commercial property has collected 4 or 5 of them from different agents, and they may judge you simply by how good your proposal is. Once we've listed the property, we don't have a property brochure, right? That's not what it's called. It's called an offering memorandum, right? Which is sort of like a brochure, but it's again, like the proposal, it's on steroids, far more involved. We talk about the demographics in the area and the walk traffic, we talk about a whole lot of things. What is the average income and what are the kinds of other things that are involved in that particular area? Because obviously that's important to people that are thinking of buying it. Writing offers. So who writes the offer? Well, if it's a residential transaction, right, it's pretty easy, right? So the buyer's agent writes the offer. Not always true in commercial. So what typically happens is the letter of intent, back and forth, we hash out the deals, right? The letter of intent is not binding. Then oftentimes it's the listing agent who writes the offer. Once the letter of intent has been back and forth, they've agreed on price and terms and commission, the listing agent writes the offer. And by the way, if you were in residential real estate, would you mention your commission in the residential purchase agreement? Would you write that in? The answer is you're not supposed to. That's a big no-no, right? The National Association of Realtors and the Code of Ethics and MLS rules say you're not supposed to be talking about commissions in the purchase agreement, but we do that in residential. And in fact, this one offer, we get this offer on this property we have in San Leandro. It's from a residential agent using the California Association of Realtors commercial form, which by the way, has some big holes in it. And I'm smiling because that actual contract is to his client's disadvantage. It also, because it's a CAR form, it doesn't talk about commissions and things like that. It's the agent, I mean, we're going to pay him when it closes, but there actually isn't anything in this transaction that says the agent needs to be paid at all. Use the wrong form, right? Just use the wrong form. So the process is very different. The listing agent oftentimes writes the offer, particularly as you go up in the scale. So these are what I call the different levels, right? There's the lower tier. The lower tier is a residential agent who occasionally, like, maybe once every 5 years, has a client that wants to buy commercial property, wants to invest in commercial property. They don't have access to a commercial database, right? They're looking in the MLS and on LoopNet. By the way, LoopNet is not the Zillow of commercial real estate. It's not. There's a company called CoStar, which owns LoopNet, and we don't necessarily have to put our property in there unless we plan on advertising it. But if I'm looking to double-ended, I may not put it in LoopNet. If you think that LoopNet has all the properties that are for sale commercially, that's just not true, right? There's a lot of properties that are just not there. There's a bunch of commercial databases. I'll talk about some of them later. There's CREXI, but it isn't quite the same. Like Redfin and Zillow, your client can find pretty much all the homes that are for sale. Not true in commercial, right? It isn't quite the same thing. Then there's the middle tier. The middle tier is an agent who's doing both residential and commercial, but they've signed up for a commercial database. They have CoStar, let's say. CoStar is the closest thing to a MLS, without the mentioning of commissions usually, but the closest thing to an MLS that's in commercial real estate. And by the way, the basic CoStar platform is going to cost you as an individual agent about $8,000 a year, right? Just want to say that, right? That database is about $8,000 a year. So and there are other options, which we're going to talk about, but you understand you're going to need to have access to the commercial database somehow, right? In order to get comparables, rent comparables, sales comparables, information on the sellers, all that sort of stuff. So the lower tier, they don't have any of that, right? They look on LoopNet, they look in Craigslist, they look in the MLS, and that's all that they're doing. That's a very low level. The middle tier has access to a commercial database and is doing a little bit more commercial. The top tier does commercial only. And by the way, most of the big commercial companies don't want you doing residential. They won't let you do residential. Their thing when they're on a presentation is to say, we're not like all those amateurs, right? Why would you want to hire an agent who does residential and commercial? That means they're not a full-time commercial agent. That's a very risky thing. You should only work with real estate agents who only do commercial realty. So that's why many of those big companies are not members of the Association of Realtors, or the multiple listing service, right? Because why? They don't have to be, they don't want to be, right? So EXP, you may have heard of EXP, has a commercial division. And I'm just going to go through a little bit about how the system works, and then I'll talk about the training that's involved, how real estate agents are paid, and a little bit about the technology. So you may know that the world is moving into a cloud, right? Blockbuster, is gone and replaced with Netflix, Amazon, and EXP is on its way of replacing a lot of commercial real estate brokers because it's a cloud-based environment. It's not a franchise. That means there are no franchise fees. They don't have brick and mortar locations, which means they have a lot less overhead. You're not confined locally. I've got agents that are in my group that are in other states and things like that. And you can have international collaboration. The cloud-based environment means there's no desk fees because there are no desks. It's possible for them to provide more training, better commission splits, less fees, because they're not renting all of those commercial spaces. There's also a revenue share system. If you were to introduce a real estate agent in Arizona to a buyer that you know from California, and that buyer were to buy a property in Arizona, would you expect to get a referral fee? Nothing weird about that. So what EXP does is that if you introduce another real estate agent to EXP and that real estate agent closes the transaction, you're going to get like a referral fee, right? And it pays, and if they introduce somebody and they introduce somebody and they introduce somebody. So we have live training right now. There's a break, a lunch break, but all day long we're having a commercial series. At the same time we're doing the residential training. The commercial series is going to repeat, but we cover pretty much everything you need to know. There's more than 50 hours a week, recorded archives, all done in the cloud. Also tech support, accounting support, all of the transaction management. There's a team of brokers all done in the cloud. International collaboration, we've opened in India and opening up in other countries as well. Those are just some recent ones: France, Portugal, and Mexico, and Australia. There's an equity plan. Our stock is about the split. It's if you search for EXPI, you're going to see our stock has gone crazy. And as an EXP agent, you can get stock when you close the transaction at a discount. Let me just ask you guys this. How many of you have heard of a company called Realogy? I don't know if anybody's heard of Realogy. Some of you may know the name because you're in real estate. Even if you don't know Realogy, you probably know some of their brands. Their brands include Coldwell Banker and Coldwell Banker Commercial, and even Century 21, and ERA, and Better Homes and Gardens, and Sotheby's, and the National Realty Trust, which owns Klein Realty and Zip Realty, and Cardis, which is a big relocation company, and let's see, a group of title companies, right? All owned by a company called Realogy. And then you have EXP, not as well known maybe, but a cloud-based company, which is worth more. Realogy, with all of those brands. By the way, the Cochrane Group is also part of the Realogy Group. I always forget one. And the answer is that the market capitalization of EXP Realty is about 3.5 to 4 times greater than Realogy. All of those put together. Just as Airbnb is worth quite a bit more than Hilton Hotels, even though Airbnb doesn't actually have rooms that they own and rent out. So does your company offer you stock in the company? How is it doing? I don't know. So the revenue share plan means that 50% of the money that EXP Commercial gets, or EXP in general, is given back to agents. 50% of the agent's gross commission income is given back to agents. 50% of all the company dollars is given back to agents as revenue share. All of the marketing materials and branding and things like that you need for commercial is included. There's an online world called Verbella, and we have, which I may mention again in a minute. You also have access to discounted medical insurance. I don't know if you've got good medical insurance, but we have a healthcare program where it's offered, you can get medical insurance at a serious discount over what you may be paying. We have Enterprise and SkySlope. Enterprise is where you can, it's like your back end of your office. You can see what's going on. You can check commissions. You can check the people that are on your team. We use a program called Workplace, which is by Facebook for interacting and communicating and posting, referrals and that sort of stuff. A bunch of preferred partners. We have an iBuyer program. We've got lenders. We've got all sorts of different preferred vendors. And we're a cloud-based company, the Amazon of real estate. So let's talk about the specifics. Now, this slide is only about the commercial program, right? There's a commercial division. You could be at EXP as a residential agent. Some of the numbers are the same, but many of them are less. And as a residential agent at EXP, you're allowed to do up to 7 commercial transactions a year. If you're mentoring on your first 3, assuming that you've gone through the certification program without having to join the commercial program. In other words, the agents that are joining the commercial program are generally agents that want to be just commercial agents. Now, just like the residential program, it's an 80-20 split. The cap is 20,000. In residential, it's 16. What do we mean by that? It means that once the company has received $20,000 in company dollars, then, which is about, I don't know, 4 million maybe in volume, something like that, given a 2.5% side, you go to 100% for the rest of the year. The startup fee for the commercial division is $250. It's only $149 in the residential. The monthly tech and cloud fee is $250. It's only $85 in residential, but then there's a lot of specialized software that you get that's geared just to commercial. The broker review is higher and the risk management fee is higher because it's commercial, and the chances of something going wrong and having to meet lawyers could be much higher, and so we have to be a lot more careful. So what you get for your technology is, first of all, a program called Build Out. Now, what Build Out is, if you've got Cloud CMA or it's like that, only really on steroids. It generates OMs, which are offering memorandums and proposals, and makes marketing flyers and site plans. And there's a customer relationship management program and a database program, all designed for commercial real estate. There's a place for vaults for documents and email, and there's a whole bunch of stuff. Now, in Reonomy is a program that I'm trying to think there's a company called LexisNexis, which is like $400 and something a month. But what Reonomy does is there's a national database, so you can generate sales comps, what other warehouses have sold in the area. There's forecasting, there's tenant records and public records and lease comparables and finding off-market properties. And one of the things about Reonomy that's cool is that, let's say you want to specialize in people that own retail space and they've had it for a certain number of years, and you want to make sure that that their phone number is available, other kinds of contact information. You can get all that out of Reonomy. All of this is included in the 250, plus you get the EXP commercial program, which includes all of that stuff, some of which I've already maybe talked about. If you would like to know more about this, and by the way, this would be true even if you're like, well, that's interesting, but I think I'm going to stick to residential, but I'm interested in finding out more about, EXP. That link should be a clickable link in your PDF. You can set up a calendar appointment to talk to me. Call me on my cell phone, text me, or call my office number, and we could talk more if you would like to know more. So that's what I've got for today. Are there any questions? Any burning questions? Everybody's shy. Maybe. We'll give it a minute. Okay. Well, if you do have questions, you've got my contact information, just reach out to me. One of the things that I've noticed is that residential, goes up and down, and commercial goes up and down, and a lot of times they're counter-cyclical. So residential market is going up, commercial market may not be going up, maybe going down overall. When the reverse happens, sometimes the commercial market is going up when the residential is going down. They move on different plans. And so having the option of being able to do both, which we could talk about, might make your business a little bit more stable. Thanks for participating. I appreciate it. Any questions, reach out to me. Have a great day. Oops, let's see if we have is that a question? What is the licensing process? Okay, Paul, if tonight I'm doing a class called how to become a successful real estate agent, and the licensing process I discuss there. You need to take some courses, you need to pass an exam. If you send me, if you call The office number will send you that link, make a calendar appointment, but tonight at 6:30, I'm going to be talking about that. So just send me an email or send me a text message or, call, and there's a session I'm doing tonight that answers that. It takes a little while. All right. Any other questions? Cool. Be safe out there, everybody. Bye.